The Cotswolds can best be seen from the Severn Vale, a long range of hills stretching as far as the eye can see. The banks are generally too steep for the plough, and careful planting of deciduous woodlands has added to the charm and beauty of the scene. Many roads wind up through gaps in this escarpment to the rolling uplands beyond. This is the western edge of a limestone plateau which slopes gently to the east and merges into the clay plains of Oxford. From earliest times it was used as one enormous sheep walk, and large sheep farms still reflect the prosperity started in those days long past. Today, many market towns lie in the folds of the hills. Hamlets of a few hundred inhabitants are scattered all over the county. And the old manor houses are still lived in. The Cotswold rivers, the Windrush, Dickler, the Colne and Leach, make perfect settings for elegant country houses. Market towns are still prosperous. And even the smallest village achieves a visual accord with the landscape. And everywhere, there are walls of Cotswold stone dating from the late 18th century enclosures. Walls which have been kept in good repair. Dry stone walling is a traditional craft which is now well paid and encouraged by the County Council. Cotswold stone, an oolitic limestone, is so called because it is composed of small, rounded grains of calcium, packed together like the roe of a fish. It has the quality of retaining light, and so responding to the moods of the day. The stone grows lichens of all colors, a light buff, blue-gray, and pure silver, deep mauve, and a diffusion of yellow, red, and violet in the sunlight. When the rock contains more iron mineral, the color is a deeper yellow, as at Guyting Quarry. Fine mansions and small cottages have been built with this honey-colored stone, and it was even used to build Melbourne Cathedral in Australia. Today, much of the stone is ground down and reconstituted into blocks, so that any new houses shall blend in with the old. It was the larger rocks which the Roman masons found so excellent when building their temples, as with this capital of a Jupiter column at Cirencester. A quantity of statues and carvings have been found at Cirencester, like these local gods. Mercury, and the three goddesses of fertility. Cirencester was, after all, the second largest Roman city in Britain, and many of their farmhouse villas had elaborate mosaic floors in the living rooms and bath suites. When the Romans departed with their legions in 406, the Dark Ages were upon us. But by 650 AD, Christianity was becoming established in Britain, and the Saxons were building churches at villages like Dunterspawn Rouse. Later, the Normans used these Saxon foundations to rebuild upon, and one such, Elkston, has this magnificent tympanum of Christ with the symbols of the four evangelists and the Lamb of God in its porch. The arch of the door has an inner roll moulding, and and the snouts of the creatures lap over the row. Two of them are perfectly human, male and female. The rest were fashionable inventions, both locally and in France, for several Norman churches in the Cotswolds have beak heads, as they also do in Normandy. The interior has a splendid example of a Norman stone vault in the tiny chancel, with richly carved arches and window surrounds. Cotswold land is thin on top, but good for growing barley and grazing sheep. In the Middle Ages, England's biggest export to the continent was wool, and more came from the Cotswolds than anywhere else. Not only was Camden a trading centre for wool, but in the 15th century it became the emporium for almost the whole of the wool produced in Wales. The wool merchants grew rich, and like William Greville, built great houses. One Camden merchant was owed over £1,000 by the Florentines. History doesn't relate if he ever got paid. Greville's house in Camden High Street shows that the masons like to display grotesque carvings on houses as well as churches. But not many of the wool houses of that period remain. A 100 years later, it was another wool merchant, Sir Baptist Hicks, who spent his money on building these almshouses alongside his own manor. Nothing of this manor now remains save the gateway, and pavilions built as summer houses with their odd twisted chimney stacks. It was Oliver Cromwell, well-known despoiler, who destroyed it. Hicks also gave generously to the Church of St. James in Camden, and in the Great West Tower is a peal of 8 bells. The oldest existing bell was given by Baptist Hicks in 1618. The tower was built last, in about 1500. Thin pilasters sweep up from the base, culminating in ogee arches in front of the pierced parapet, an idea copied from Gloucester Cathedral Tower. The nave has the same look of calculated design and displayed virtuosity, with arcades of exaggeratedly concave mouldings. The lectern is a 15th century Latin eagle. Latin is an alloy of copper, zinc, lead and tin, and was given by Hicks. All the original glass has long since vanished. Probably a Puritan vicar thought it smacked too much of papacy, but there is some good Victorian glass. William Greville certainly must have given lavishly, since his brass and that of his wife says, "Here lies William Greville, flower of the wool merchants of England." In Fairford is the brass of another wool merchant, John Tame. Wool stapler and cloth merchant, he was the main benefactor of St. Mary's Church. Using only the base of the existing structure, an entirely new church was built by 1497. The exterior is remarkable for the many grotesque sculptures, some of which belong to the earlier building, and which Tame incorporated. In the last 480 years, not surprisingly, Many of these have been eaten away by wind and weather, but have been brilliantly replaced by a local mason. Inevitably, unless buildings are to be allowed to decay, replacement of external materials eventually becomes unavoidable, and when the new sculptures have weathered to match the old, they will appear to be completely successful. Some of the original pinnacles were blown down by a whirlwind during Matins in 1971, like the whirlwind which blew in this great west window during the reign of Queen Anne. It is, of course, the medieval glass for which Fairford is renowned. It all came from the same glassworks in England, and both Flemish and English painters were used. In the North Clerestory are the traitors and persecutors of the church. And above them, terrible devils. In the great east window is the story of Christ crucified. Elegant wool churches were built on Norman remains in many towns of the Cotswolds, and Northleach is another outstanding example, with its magnificent nave, undoubtedly the work of the same master mason as Camden. The monasteries built huge wool stores for their manors. Here at Arlington Row in Bybury, this row of cottages was once one long wool store. Built in 1380, it points the vast scale of the sheep and wool market in those days. The row was built on the cruck principle, which can be seen in one of the cottages now modernized by the National Trust. Large curved branches were cut down the middle, and the halves formed the main beams of the building. Not only did the monastery have its wool store, but it also had its mill. A mill is recorded on this site at Arlington in the Domesday Book. It was for corn grinding, but was also used for fulling the cloth woven by 17th century cottagers in the row. The church, too, of course, had its tithes to collect. And again, the scale of the operation comes as a surprise. This tithe barn, bigger than many a Cotswold church, has 5 original bays, with a later addition of another 4 in 1727. Through the centuries, the church has built some splendid houses for its rectors, and Buckland has perhaps the oldest surviving medieval rectory in England. The older house was enlarged about 1480 by the addition of a great hall, with an open timbered roof of 2 bays. It was made from hornbeam, which has the valuable capacity of being impervious to the deathwatch beetle, that scourge of many fine old buildings. It has a central hammer-beam truss, and the ends are gracefully carved with angels carrying shields. Medieval houses must have been very uncomfortable with their huge, draughty halls. So ordinary people began to turn their attention to building comfortable and durable houses in stone. Today, this gabled Cotswold manor house with its yew tree is a romantic dream, which for some lucky people has come true. The original owners of Owl Pen would most probably have got their wealth from the wool trade. In this courthouse, the squire of the day would sit to mete out justice, or the law anyway, to the local community. And with the Cotswolds growing good barley, it had its own mill. And a barn to store the grain. This 15th century building is another fine example of cruck construction. In one corner, still with the remains of the bark of the tree from which it came, is a huge cider press. In the manor house itself, the great hall is low of ceiling, elegant of fireplace, and is eminently suited to the most fastidious tastes of today. Up above in the great chamber can be seen a unique example of late 16th century painted cloth hangings. Looking at first sight to be tapestry, they are in reality cheap Tudor substitutes. As Falstaff commended to Mistress Quickly, "And for thy walls a pretty slight drollery is worth 1,000 of those fly-bitten tapestries." Far from durable, these were never moved, and remain today the only complete examples of Flemish painted Hessian work. Owlpen, in its remote and beautiful valley near the Severn, is the epitome of romance. But there are smaller manor houses in nearly every village. Owlpen is on the fringe of the cloth trade, which was developed in the 18th century using 14th century corn mills like this. Many mills were built in the Stroud Valley, but the Industrial Revolution, when it came to the north of England, passed the Cotswolds by, leaving it as a purely agricultural area. Gradually, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the small estates were absorbed into bigger ones, so that most of the country was owned by a few big landowners who were able to preserve the status quo for their benevolent but autocratic way of life. Farmers, too, increased their acres, leaving the rolling hills unspoiled by industrial growth. The villages were carefully preserved by the big landowners, and with the lack of industry, had little need to house a growing population. And without local industry, a changing population brought artists and professional people to live in the villages. In 1949, the Cotswolds were declared an area of natural beauty. Any new building that is allowed has to conform to the planning control of the Cotswolds District Council. Whether built of original stone or reconstituted, they'll need time to weather before they're accepted. But then, that happens with people as well in country areas. The farm buildings are not only beautiful, but have moved with the times and absorbed the latest in modern farming techniques. With all these factors taken into consideration, it would seem that the present character of the Cotswolds will remain unchanged for the foreseeable future.